All started in 1920. Black baseball players started on their journey. They had the gift of talent and belief. 400,000 spectators filled the seats to come see them play, y'all. Black men playing baseball.
I would like to just welcome everyone to our second seasons of Buffalo Baseball 1857 to 2020, Talking Baseball Part 2, Breaking Baseball's Color Barrier, and featuring our guest from Kansas City, Bob Hendrick, the president of the Negro League's Baseball Museum. At this time, I would like everyone to remove their baseball cap as we hear the rendition of the national anthem as sung by former Bison pitcher Morris Madden. Now, we found out that Morris was a singer of the national anthem back in 1989, the second year of Pilot Field. Morris and Dorn Taylor were teammates when we were affiliated with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Dorn said, "I want you to sing before every one of our home games." So we had to rearrange the schedule, put Morris out there, and he had his backup singers, and Dorn never lost a game at home that year. So without any further ado, from South Carolina, Morris Madden.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Play ball. Thank you very much, Mo. Morris Madden will be back with us a little bit into the program. And Morris, I'd be happy to let you know that former Booster Club president Charlie Green and Booster Club member Vicky Christopher are smiling ear to ear on that rendition. Many years ago, when the Bisons began in 1983, I was a guest on the WBEN radio freeform sports show. Its host in 1984 was John Murphy. He had followed the legendary Stan Barron. In 1989, Murph succeeded Rick Azar as WKBW's sports anchor, joining legends Irv Weinstein and Tom Jones. He became sports director in 1992 and held the position for 18 years. He joined WIVB Channel 4 and was there for 4.5 years, and then he left in 2012 to focus on Bills duties. A 2019 inductee into the Buffalo Broadcasters Hall of Fame, Murph has been the voice of the Buffalo Bills since the retirement of Hall of Fame voice Van Miller. From 1985 to 88, Murph was a color analyst to Hall of Famer Pete Weber, calling Bison baseball games. Our program host, John Murphy.
Thanks, Mike. I'm glad you finally got to my Bison's experience. Those are four of the best years. Those are four of the best years I enjoyed in my career doing Bison baseball with Pete, 1985 through 1988. the last 3 years at War Memorial Stadium and the first year at then Pilot Field. Those are my favorite summers, those 4 summers. Yeah.
Well, Murph, we had an awful lot of great times over there at the old ballpark,
Yeah.
and then we opened up Pilot Field in 1988. But before we get to tonight's program, why don't we very briefly talk about the Bison Blue Jays summer of 2021 and what a summer it is.
Yeah, I mean, it really hasn't started here yet, right? But the Blue Jays will be here before much longer. What, 8 days away? The Blue Jays will go up against Florida at Salem Field, or Miami. They call them Miami, right? Yeah, first major league game with fans in Buffalo in 106 years. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I bought 4 tickets for the series the following weekend against Houston. It's a lot of money. I mean, it's 10 times as much as a Bison game, right? It's $102 I paid for good seats on the third base line, but I'm looking forward to it. And the Bisons are good this year. I regret that it doesn't look like we'll get a chance to see them. Like to see Manoah pitch. I mean, he's 3-0. He's doing great. The Bisons are playing really well. I regret not being able to see the Bisons, but I'm excited about the Blue Jays. I am.
Absolutely. I think it's a tremendous tribute to the work of Bob and Mindy Rich, and also the relationship of Mike Buchkowski, the president of Rich Baseball, and the president of the Blue Jays and their general manager. That goes back to when they were with Cleveland, and we had all championship winning teams back then. I see him doing the same thing in building the Blue Jays and their farm system.
Yeah, I can't say enough about the Bison staff. And I talked to Mike Buchkowski about a month, maybe 5-6 weeks ago, and I just root for those people that work there. And look, they're approaching now a second consecutive season without their team. They'll have baseball there, but without their team there. And a lot of people, had to be furloughed or just let go, I guess. And that's unfortunate. I look forward to the return of the Bisons next year, and I'm looking forward to the Blue Jays next week. The first 8 games are sold out already. The next block of tickets go on sale, June 8th, I guess. And, it's good. It's going to be good. It's going to be different, but it is going to be good. And I'm excited about that. I'm excited about our first guest too, Mike, and he's been waiting patiently on the line. He is the president of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. They celebrated their 100th anniversary of the Negro Leagues last year. This guy is a historian, obviously, and a guy who knows a lot about the Negro Leagues. And of course, last December, historical and statistical records of all 7 of the officially acknowledged Negro Leagues will be accepted into Major League Baseball now from 1920 through 1948 in the Negro Leagues. They're now considered Major League teams. We're happy to have Bob Hendrick with us all the way from Kansas City. Bob, it's great to have you here. Thanks very much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
No, it's my pleasure. All the way from Kansas City by way of Milwaukee, which is where I am now.
Oh, okay.
No, that's okay. I traveled here today for an event tomorrow with our friends over the Milwaukee Brewers. So it's been quite the day, but really excited to be part of the show tonight. And so thank you guys for having me.
Thanks for coming on. You must have welcomed the news about the Negro Leagues stats being included as Major League records and stats now. Tell me, was that the result of a long push by you and others in pushing for Negro League stats to be included?
Well, I certainly think that the work that we've done, the museum has been around now in its 31st year. We started in a little one-room office in 1990 and became recognized as America's National Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in 2006. So we've had a long-standing track record of celebrating and hopefully substantiating the level of play and how special this piece of history was. And so I certainly think that had an impact in leading us to that historic day that took place last December. And I couldn't be more excited about it. Now, for me, understanding the fact that I was probably more excited about the recognition even than I was the statistics being absorbed into the annals of Major League Baseball history. The recognition was far more important. For me, it was about the recognition. It was about the atonement. It was about the acknowledgement that these leagues were indeed as major as any league. And the fact that they had been blatantly dismissed was a travesty. And so Major League Baseball really righted a wrong. And then you add the dimension of rolling in the statistics into the annals of baseball history and the incredible work that all those historians did to go back and really unearth this statistical data to provide the necessary quantitative data that would be needed that led us to this historic date. And so I have to tip my cap to them, because without them, I don't know if we would have gotten to this place where we are right now. And so, yeah, we're all very excited about this. And, hopefully fans are excited. And based on what I can tell, fans are absolutely excited about this.
And can I, on a simplistic level, Bob, I've read and heard it said that, the stats aside, the Negro Leagues, Josh Gibson equals Babe Ruth and Satchel Paige equals Walter Johnson. Is that the way you look at it? Is that too simplistic?
No, I don't think that's overly simplistic at all. The thing that has really driven Negro Leagues history through the years was the lore and legend surrounding these incredible athletes. And to be honest, guys, I don't ever want to lose the lore and legend. No. Babe Ruth was Paul Bunyan for Major League Baseball. And Josh Gibson is John Henry in the Negro Leagues. And I want John Henry to forever be that hard swinging, hammering man that he was. And so the folklore and legend in and around these athletes, that's what makes for the stories. Because as we all know, they didn't ask to play in the Negro Leagues. They had to play in the Negro Leagues. And so it was by no fault of their own. And they just wanted an opportunity to showcase their world-class baseball abilities, and they were able to do that. Now that we have this additional data, and the statistics for me really are contextual. They will help that person that just has to have these numbers to believe that Gibson was as powerful and mighty as he was, or that Satchel threw as hard as we all claim that he threw, and that he threw as long as we claim, which you don't have to go very far to find out that he pitched for an awful long time, and he was very good for that entire career. And so in my mind, he's the greatest pitcher of all time. And so maybe these numbers will help, but what you'll get is a mixed bag. So you'll see league records that may have Gibson hitting 250 home runs. And somebody's going to say, well, that ain't Babe Ruth like. I thought he was Babe Ruth. And then you have to say, well, God, he was hitting those home runs every 9 at bat, or whatever, those numbers. So once you understand the numbers, you can then look and say, okay, this would have been projected over a 162 game season. Well, the Negro Leagues played nowhere near 162 games in their shortened seasons. And so that'll help. But then on the flip side, you'll see Gibson's 1943 season where he hit some ridiculous number like 441 in 1943, which now may just be the highest single season batting record of all time. And so, we kind of got to take the good with the bad when it comes with this, as it relates to people doubting the ability of these legendary players.
Bob, a question. What about the conditions that the Negro League players played in versus the Major League players back then?
Yeah.
Remember, we're talking different eras, but talk about playing conditions versus playing conditions, and both on and off the field.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Mike. And I think that's the most difficult thing to quantify, because we can't really determine the toll that this took on those players. These long bus rides, not knowing where you can stop and get something to eat, sometimes having to sleep on the bus and eat your peanut butter and crackers because you couldn't get a meal from the same fans who had just cheered you. They'd go into the town, fill up the ballpark, and couldn't get a meal, wouldn't have a place to stay. So they slept on the bus and would eat their peanut butter and crackers. Oftentimes, if they were playing in a Major League stadium, they couldn't even wash their uniforms. They couldn't use the showers. So, how do you quantify the impact that had? And yet they were still able to play great baseball. No major leaguer ever had to deal with those kinds of conditions, that kind of stress. Their primary focus, now you may have some off the field issues that you dealt with. That was probably more in the lines of family issues. And the Negro League players were dealing with those issues as well. But you never had to deal with a segregated America that was putting you at such a tremendous disadvantage And yet somehow or another, they were still able to play this game. But you know what, Mike? The baseball field was their sanctuary. That was their sanctuary. That is where they could showcase their world-class abilities. They wanted everybody to know that they could play this game as well as anyone. And so even when we talk about the stats, these were very self-assured individuals. They knew that they could play, and they knew how good their league was. And quite frankly, the major leaguers knew how good they were. And they wanted everybody else to know how good they were. So yeah, when the opportunity presented itself to get to the major leagues, they wanted in the Negro Leagues.
One last question here from me, and then Murph has a couple. Is it disappointing for you looking back, and as you put this museum together and you're collecting the history, how disappointing is it that it took so long for Jackie Robinson to be the first?
It's really interesting, Mike, because as you well know, Jackie was the beginning, but he was also the end. He was the beginning of progress. He opened the door for opportunities for both Black and brown players to play in the major leagues. But it also killed the Negro Leagues. And it put a lot of great players out of business. The major leagues weren't going to take all these players, and sadly, they weren't going to make the Negro Leagues a minor league to be that feeder system for them. So yes, what we wonder is, what would the record books have been like if the doors had opened before 1947? And because I can assure you that they were playing great baseball well before 1947. And what makes the story, I think, even more profound, and people ask me this question all the time, was Jackie Robinson the best player in the Negro Leagues? And the answer is no. He wasn't the best player on his own Kansas City Monarch team. And by no stretch, folks, is that to disparage Jackie Robinson, because Jackie Robinson is one of the greatest athletes in Major League Baseball history. He's one of the greatest athletes in American sports history. He was a four-sport star at UCLA, and baseball was his weakest sport. He's much better basketball, football, track athlete than he was baseball player. Some say an even better tennis player. So there was nothing that Jackie could not do. So this is not disrespecting Jackie. It's just speaking to the enormous talent that was there in the Negro Leagues. And so had those doors opened before 1947, I really think the record books would be entirely different.
Bob, not many would dispute you when you call Satchel Paige the greatest pitcher of all time. But I loved, I came across a piece of video. You were addressing a team of baseball players in Kansas City recently, and you let them know Satchel used to name his pitches. How did he go about that?
Yes, he did. He did, but because that was the charisma of Satchel Paige. And so Satchel, folks, did indeed have names for his pitches. So he didn't have fastball, curveball, changeup, not Satchel. Satchel had what he called his midnight creeper. He had the two-humper. He had the bat dodger. He had the hesitation pitch. He had the long tom, the short tom, the jump ball, the trouble ball, the radio ball, the wobbly ball, the dipsy-do. And fellas, he also had a pitch that he called his B-ball. You know why he called it the B-ball?
No.
Because Satchel says it bees where I want it to be when I want it to be there. And so I tell all of my major league pitchers when they come visit the museum, they better develop themselves a B-ball.
Great. That's a great story. Hey, at the museum in Kansas City, I had and he's deceased now, but a Buffalo News reporter, Alan Wilson. Every time the Buffalo Bills would go to play the Chiefs in football in Kansas City, Alan Wilson would make a trip to the Negro Leagues Museum. I plan on doing that this October when we're there. But take us through the museum. What are the must-see things that anyone who has not been there yet should see in your museum?
Well, the image that is mirrored in behind me is the centerpiece of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. It is called the Field of Legends. And honestly, and I say this, and I'm biased, I think it is one of the most compelling displays in any museum anywhere in the world. It features 10 life-size statues of Negro League greats who are cast in position as if they were playing a game. They represent 10 of the first group of Negro Leaguers to be inducted into the National Baseball Hall of Fame at Cooperstown. And so everything at the museum is actually built around this baseball diamond. And so when you walk in, you can see the field, but you can't get to it. And what we do is we force you to learn their story. We segregate you from the field. We wanted our visitors, particularly my young audience, to at least remotely experience what segregation was like. So in the case of these incredibly talented athletes, these very courageous athletes, they knew that they were so close. They were good enough to play in the major leagues, so close to it, yet so far from it. So from most vantage points in the museum, you can see the field, but you can't get to it. And so the only way that you're allowed to take the field at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, you literally have to earn that right. And by the time you bared witness to everything that they had to endure just to play baseball in this country, then the very last thing that happens is now you can take the field. And along that journey, you are literally witnessing the social rise of America right alongside the rise and subsequent fall of the Negro Leagues. And it's told through a wonderful collection of photographs, artifacts, great scripted pieces, multimedia displays. So I tell you what, people leave that museum, guys, and they leave cheering the power of the human spirit to persevere and prevail. It is so triumphant in nature. And let me warn you right now, for those who think that it's a sad story, you got the wrong place. This is a celebration. It is the celebration of that power of the human spirit to persevere and prevail.
You know, Buffalo never was home to an official Negro Leagues baseball team, but there are several instances where teams played a while here, and teams would barnstorm through here a lot. Barnstorming was a big deal, right, through that era, 1920 through 48.
Oh, absolutely. The Negro Leaguers were heralded barnstormers. You know, I have a new podcast now called Black Diamonds, and we do this with Sirius XM Radio for those of you who are podcast fans, and we tell stories of the Negro Leagues in long form. Well, the most recent episode is on Satchel and his barnstorming antics. And I can tell you now, we'll probably have 4 or 5 episodes on Satchel because of everything. His career was just so expansive.
Right.
This portion just looks at barnstorming. And for those who may be hearing that term for the first time, it just means that they were taking baseball to towns and other parts of the globe that had not really seen professional baseball. And so the Negro Leagues they were very much accustomed to doing this. And so they'd ride into those towns, and particularly when the old man was pitching, when Satchel was pitching, he would ride into those towns, guys, and the entire town was shut down. and so, but it was very commonplace. And even if they weren't playing the local town teams, they sometimes take other Negro League teams on the road, and they played games until they were getting to the city that they were actually going to play an official league game in. And so this went on all the time. And so there are so many people across this country who got exposed to Black baseball as a result of the barnstorming aspect of this. And so upstate New York is no stranger to having seen a lot of great barnstorming games, and certainly its fair share of Negro League players, because one of my favorite stories, it didn't happen in Buffalo, but it was in Rochester when Satchel was playing for the Miami Marlins. We were talking a little bit about that backstage. And Satchel was playing for the Miami Marlins at this time, and they are in Rochester, New York. Now, mind you, folks, Satchel is believed to be 50 years old at this time. If you believe that he was born in 1906, which I absolutely do not, but for the sake of this story, we'll say that Satchel was born in 1906, and so this would make him 50 years old in 1956. Bill Veeck had brought him to play for the Miami Marlins AAA team, and the old man at 56 or 66 was still dealing. He was pitching tremendously well. And so they're in Rochester, New York. And so the Rochester team, the first time I heard the story, it was the great Los Angeles Dodger broadcaster, Vin Scully, told the story. And so they're in Rochester, and the Rochester team had a knot hole in the outfield wall. And they had a promotion that said that if any batter could hit the ball on the fly through the knot hole, you could win $10,000. Well, it was virtually impossible. Well, a young Whitey Herzog was an outfielder for the Miami Marlins that year. And so Whitey says he's out in the outfield jogging, and he took some baseballs with him to see if the ball would fit in the hole. Well, there's just enough circumference to squeeze that ball in the hole. He goes and gets the old man. He says, Satchel, you always bragging about how great your control is and how you can throw a baseball over a chewing gum wrapper. I bet you a bottle of old granddad bourbon that you can't throw this baseball through that knot hole. Now, fellas, Satchel had a nickname for everybody. His nickname for Herzog was Wild Child. He says, Wild Child, will the ball fit? Well, Herzog shows him it's enough circumference to get that ball through the hole. Satchel says, Wild Child, I'll take that bet. And so Whitey Herzog steps off 60 feet, 6 inches, puts down the pitching rubber. He's going to give the old man 3 tries to throw that ball through the knot hole. And he says, Satchel takes the baseball like a hunter is looking through the telescope of his rifle. And he measures. And he says, the first pitch goes in the hole, but spins back out. He says he's in disbelief, but he says there's no way he can get any closer than that. And when you know, the very next pitch, right through the hole, Satchel reaches down, picks up the bottle of bourbon and says, Wild Child, I'll take that. And thunders on off into the sunset, man.
What a great story.
And probably didn't get the $10,000.
No, he wasn't gonna get the 10. They weren't gonna give him the 10 for that.
Hey,
But
Bob, on the call here, or on as one of our viewers is from Buffalo, an attorney, Charles Wilson, and he's involved with the Willie Hutch Jones sports and educational program. And Charles is helping to bring a youth baseball program in the inner city. And as we were talking the other day about the Negro League and in Buffalo, he was saying that Buffalo is a great place to watch the games because so many of the fans were from the South. And that's where a lot of the Negro League teams came from. And they would come to Offerman Stadium in Buffalo and play on a Sunday. And after Sunday service, the men and women would come dressed to the nines and fill the place, have fashion shows. Tell us what the experience was like at a Negro League game.
Oh, man. You know,
Bob,
talk about it because you did a great job, Mike, of kind of helping set the stage. To put it in perspective, Sunday games in the Negro Leagues, and a lot of times they were playing on Sundays because Major League Baseball didn't play that often on Sundays. So the Negro Leagues were actually renting the ballpark, and then they play that Sunday doubleheader. We would leave church, going straight to the ballpark, dressed to the nines, as they would say. Sunday games were so popular that Black churches would move their service time up an hour. Now, folks, if you know anything about the Black church, you don't mess with service time. 11 o'clock Sunday go to meeting. Well, when the Kansas City Monarchs were at home, Sunday service started at 10 o'clock. And everybody filed out going to that Sunday doubleheader looking pretty. And it was so festive. I mean, it was the place to be. It was a place to be seen, and was the place to go see. And so there was nothing recreational about a Negro Leagues game. It was the social event of the week.
We're with Bob Kendrick, who is the president of the Negro League Baseball Museum in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, Bob, you've talked about Josh Gibson and Satchel Paige. One of the greatest all-timers, a Hall of Famer, Henry Aaron, just passed away a couple of months ago, January. He has a connection to Buffalo, right? He was playing here with the Indianapolis Clowns in 1952. Tell us, first of all, why were the Indianapolis Clowns playing here in Buffalo, and why did Henry Aaron sign his major league contract here in Buffalo?
Yeah, no, he played for the Indianapolis Clowns and never played in Indianapolis because the Clowns spent the entire 1952 season playing in Buffalo, and they were on the road the entire time. And so a young Henry Aaron, 18 years old, as you see in those pictures there, and that picture of him standing at the train station is my favorite photograph in the entire museum. because I expressed this to Mike when Mike first reached out to me about joining you all. Henry Aaron is my all-time favorite baseball player, my childhood idol as a kid growing up in Georgia. But that photograph, he's 18 years old, a skinny, cross-handed hitting shortstop when he comes up to the Clowns in 1952. And he's standing there at the train station in Mobile, Alabama. He's starting to fill out a little bit in that photograph. He started to look like he must have weighed 150 pounds in that photograph of him standing there at the train station. And he's leaving to go join the Clowns. Well, he meets them in Buffalo, of all places. And he was likely leaving home for the very first time. But what you can't see in this particular photograph is at his foot is a small duffel bag. And let me backtrack, because for those of you who might not know what cross-handed means, Henry Aaron was a right-hand hitter, as we know, who was actually hitting with his left hand on top. That is unorthodox. There it is. Yeah, that is unorthodox. The fear was that you would break your wrist hitting in that manner. Well, folks, Henry Aaron is knocking the cover off the baseball in a highly unorthodox fashion. When he gets to the Clowns, they put the right hand on top, and the rest, as we say, is history. Well, that little duffel bag, I was giving my childhood idol a tour of the Negro Leagues Museum for the first time in 1999. And let me tell y'all, it was the first and only time that I've ever been starstruck. Now, mind you, we've had presidents of these United States tour this museum, first ladies of the United States tour the museum, General Colin Powell, just a plethora of athletes and entertainers. And with no disrespect to any of them, they are not Henry Aaron in the eyes, mind, and heart of this kid from Crawfordville, Georgia. And so we get to that picture there, and he tells me, he says, Bob, I may have had 2 changes of clothes in that bag, $1.50 in my pocket, and a ham sandwich that my mama had made me, going to go chase that dream. Well, fellas, it worked out pretty well for the Hammer. Yeah, he'll go down as one of this game's all-time greatest players, but it all began in 1952, right there in Buffalo, with the Indianapolis Clowns. Yeah, and he was only there for about 3 months. And I'll never forget, my dear friend, the late, great Buck O'Neill, says the first time he saw Henry was actually in Mobile for an exhibition game. And he goes out to exchange lineup cards with the Clowns manager, Buster Hayward. And he sees hitting in the 3rd hole this kid named Aaron. And he said, Buster, who's this kid Aaron? And Buster let out a big grin. He said, oh, Buck, you got to see him. So Buck said, okay, well, we'll see what he got. Well, by the end of the day, that kid Aaron had gone 4 for 4 with 2 home runs. And so Buck says he and Buster were having dinner. They were having dinner, and he says, Buster, I ain't gonna have to worry about that kid Aaron coming to Kansas City. He said, what you talking about, Buck? Somebody's going to sign him. And sure enough, 3 months later, he's signed by, of course, then the Boston Braves, who would become the Milwaukee Braves, who, of course, would become my all-time favorite team, the Atlanta Braves. And he would just go on to greatness. But as great as he was as a player, I think he was even greater as a human being. And as a civil rights icon, a philanthropist, you know, he was just an amazing man. So yes, there's a little piece of my heart that is still hurting over the passing of my childhood idol. And I had the opportunity to share the story of me circling the bases. When he hit home run 715 in Atlanta Fulton County Stadium, I'm 80 miles away in Crawfordville, Georgia. And as my childhood idol, and I'm almost 12 years old, when my childhood idol was touching them all in Fulton County Stadium, I'm touching them all in my parents' living room. My mother's couch was first base. She had no TV. That was second base. She had another old couch. That was third base. And her recliner was home plate. And I was jumping for joy. And I got to share that story with him. And even more so, we had a chance to sit down and eat some Kansas City barbecue together. We had a platter of ribs together, man. So it doesn't get any better than that for me.
Hey, Bob, before we get into what I think is one of the most horrible stories, and that is that off season leading up to the record-breaking home run. Take us back to the story you told me about Hank Aaron's idol was Jackie Robinson. Tell us the story about when he played, when Robinson came through Henry's hometown.
Well, what Jackie Robinson did was gave every young black baseball player a real opportunity to dream. And for Henry Aaron, and I think the thing, Mike, that strikes me, and they both had very similar qualities, because quite frankly, Henry did not want to go to Atlanta. When Bill Bartholomew buys the Braves, Henry was very comfortable where I am right now in the city of Milwaukee, because the South was just so polarizing. And he wasn't enamored about the idea of going back. And so Bill Bartholomew really kind of sells Atlanta to him. And of course, Atlanta would eventually fall in love with him. But the thing that I always relate back to is what he had to endure chasing Ruth's record. And again, this is 1974. Jackie Robinson breaks color barrier in 1947. 27 years after Jackie breaks the color barrier, Henry Aaron is going through the same level of hate and vitriol that welcomed Jackie Robinson into the major league 27 years later. I don't know if people realize that the man got nearly 1 million pieces of hate mail because he was making this ascent to break this legendary white icon's home run record. In 1974, he was getting death threats. His family is in hiding. He doesn't know if he's going to make it around the bases when he hits 715. And I know you both remember when the two kids run out on the field, and I think everybody collectively had, held their breath. They were coming out to celebrate. They had no intent of doing anything harmful to Henry Aaron. They were just on the field to celebrate. But do you realize that there were snipers in that ballpark? And Henry Aaron's bodyguard is armed. And what would have happened if somebody had gotten trigger happy? You know what I'm saying? And shot one of those kids because they thought that they were going to do something to Henry Aaron. And I remember him talking about his mother meeting him at home plate. And I think we've all seen that picture where she gives him the biggest bear hug. He said he didn't know his mother could hug that hard. But you notice how she turns. She turned because she was prepared to shield her baby if somebody was going to try to shoot her. She was going to take the bullet for her baby. That's a mother's love. That is nothing like a mother's love. And again, I say this because, again, this is 1974. It hadn't been that long ago. And, what should have been one of the most memorable moments in his life was actually one of the most difficult, devastating times in his life. It took him 25 years, guys, before he was finally able to celebrate what many thought to be the greatest sports accomplishment of all time. He finally got to exhale 25 years later because the memories were so painful. Because again, when you see, particularly when we saw Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa, when they put on that epic race for the home run championship, their kids are there at the game, greeting them when they came across home plate. Henry Aaron is recollecting the fact that his family is in hiding because there were so many threats on not only his life, but their lives.
Bob, we showed some photos up here. If we could show them again of Henry Aaron in the dugout. This was at War Memorial Stadium. That was the first home of the Buffalo Bills.
Oh,
that
yeah.
photo here was him and my all-time favorite of the National League, Ernie Banks. That was at War Memorial Stadium. That photo was sent to me by Doug Hartmeyer. But when Hank came here, back when the Rich family bought the Buffalo Bisons and saved professional baseball in Buffalo in 1983, we had a group of elderly black men and women who would sit behind home plate, and just sitting with them and talking about the old days. And they talked about the Negro Leagues coming in and how they would go to the games. And they said, when you have that game, that All-Star game this year, our old timers, we want to meet Mr. Aaron. And you know how all the everyone's around them and you can't, pull a player aside. Well, I was able to maneuver him over to this group, and I was there with him and about a dozen of his peers, so to speak, as fans. And after they got through the pleasantries of, what it was like, they got into and asked him some tough questions. What was it like after leaving Buffalo and now being a pro? What did you realize leaving the Negro League and going into professional baseball? And his second year in baseball, he was the first black player, I think, in the South Atlantic League. And he talked some horrible stories of racism that he saw day in and day night.
Oh, Mike, Sally League was tough for those players. I mean, it left scars on those guys. The major leagues were a cup of tea in comparison to what it was like, what life was like as they would work, as they were playing in those minor leagues, because they're playing in so many of those small southern towns, man. And so it was very difficult for them. You see, when he was in the Negro Leagues, he was really shielded from a lot of that. See, those older players in the Negro Leagues, they were going to take care of those ball players. And see, they knew that Henry Aaron and Ernie Banks had a chance to get there. Jackie had already kind of done this, and that older ball player knew that he was in a quandary. He wasn't going to get there. But a player that, like Henry Aaron and Ernie Banks and those guys who would ultimately come up the ranks, they sheltered those guys. They took care of those guys. So when Henry Aaron leaves to go to the major leagues, Henry Aaron took that older Negro Leagues player with him in spirit, and he never forgot them. He never, ever forgot them. And I was talking to the author of the biography on Ernie Banks. And as you both know, Ernie was playing for Buck O'Neil here in Kansas City with the great Kansas City Monarchs. And when the Cubs wanted to sign Ernie, Ernie did not want to go. They had to push Ernie out the door. They said, Ernie, you got to go. You got to go. When you go, that gives another opportunity for another guy to get there. Because Ernie was comfortable playing in the Negro Leagues where he was with people who looked like him. And he could, after the game, they were going to go to dinner. They were going to go to the nightclub and listen to jazz. And he was afraid of the isolation that he would experience when he got to the major leagues. So when he gets to Chicago, what happens? When the game is over, all of his teammates go their own way. And it was just he and Gene Baker to fend for themselves on the south side of Chicago, because that's where they had to be. And so it took something for them to say, okay, I'm going to step out. I'm going to go and step out of myself and do this. And Mike, it goes back to what you asked me in the top of the show about the challenges that these athletes faced, in comparison to their major league counterparts. And so, yeah, it was, but, thank goodness that older Negro Leagues player was nurturing. They took care of them. They taught them how to deal in society. They were going to keep them out of harm's way. And to a player that got to the major leagues, they never forgot those players, man. And I know that Henry Aaron always talked about the debt of gratitude that he owed to the Negro Leagues in general, but particularly those players that were the Clowns. Ernie talks about that, and Buck O'Neil would then follow him to Chicago and continue that process of nurturing Ernie. He taught him social graces. He taught him how to dress. He did everything, alongside of teaching them how to play this game. And of course, Ernie was pretty doggone good at this game.
Well, let's play two. Murph?
I just have one more thing for you, Bob. You mentioned Buck O'Neil a few times. I had an opportunity to meet him. I actually had lunch with him like 25 years ago. He was here for a dinner in Buffalo. He was a great guy, but what a marvelous ambassador, not just for the Negro Leagues, but for baseball in general, huh?
For baseball. You're absolutely right. I don't know if there's a greater ambassador than the late great Buck O'Neill, who was involved in this game for 7 decades. And you're right. It didn't matter whether it was the Negro Leagues, if it was Major League, if it was college baseball, if it was international baseball, if it was youth baseball. Buck was always there promoting this game and the merits of this game, and then sharing his insight and perspectives around this game. And as you both know, he became the voice of the Negro Leagues. You know, Ken Burns' epic documentary on the history of baseball introduced America to Buck O'Neill. Guys, he was 82 years old at that time. And as Buck would tell me, he said, Bob, I've been telling these stories for 40 years and nobody ever listened. And Ken Burns gave him a platform and people listened.
You know, Bob, that 1985 Old Timers game that we had in Buffalo, we also had the first black player in the American League, and that was through Bill Veeck, and that was Larry Doby.
Larry Doby, the forgotten man. You know, and we just recently opened an exhibit, a new exhibit at the Negro Leagues Museum called Barrier Breakers. And the Barrier Breaker exhibit chronicles all of the players that broke their respective major league teams' color barriers. So from Jackie joining Brooklyn in 1947 through Elijah Pumpsy Green being the last to complete the integration cycle in 1959 with the Boston Red Sox. And so it took 12 years before every major league team had at least one black baseball player. Larry Doby would integrate the American League, Mike, as you just mentioned, literally just weeks after Jackie. And he's almost an afterthought. He's a forgotten guy. It's only really been over the last decade or so that people have finally started to pay rightful tribute to Larry Doby's pioneering role. But that's how we are in our society. We always celebrate the first. We never remember the second. And if you number 16, you can pretty much forget it. And so we decided that it was important to chronicle all their stories. Because I can tell you this, and I'll say that there's no level of uncertainty. It did not get any easier for Pumpsy Green in 1959 in Boston than it did for Jackie Robinson in 1947 in Brooklyn. So all of these players had their trials and tribulations as they were trying to blaze a pathway into Major League Baseball, and they deserve to be more than just a footnote in baseball history. And so if we don't tell the story, who will? Right. And so we built this beautiful exhibit that chronicles all of those players, including the great Larry Doby, whom Effa Manley would eventually sell to Bill Veeck. Bill Veeck initially offered her $5,000. Now, this is just after Jackie had signed. Bill Veeck offered her $5,000. And Mrs. Manley, who had fought Branch Rickey over Monty Irvin. Yeah, see, Branch tried to get Monty Irvin first. And Effa Manley was prepared to fight. She was going to litigate. He didn't need that. And so after Rickey basically takes Jackie away from the Kansas City Monarchs. Now, you might hear him say he signed Jackie from the Kansas City Monarchs. No, he didn't. He took Jackie from the Kansas City Monarchs because J.L. Wilkinson never got paid a dime for a player that he had under contract. But Wilkie could not fight back. You know why? Because J.L. Wilkinson, fellas, was white. Yeah, J.L. Wilkinson was a white owner, owned the Kansas City Monarchs. And so you think about this. If this white man who made his entire living in black baseball, if he tries to block what every black fan on the face of this planet had been waiting for a black man to play in the major league, man, that fan base that had been so loyal to him, they'd have turned their back on him right away. So he was damned if he didn't, and he was damned if he did. And so he relented. Robinson signs with the Dodgers. Veeck calls on Effa Manley, offers $5,000. Mrs. Manley now knows that she's stuck between that rock and proverbial hard place. She's not going to be able to fight these guys off much longer. And she writes to Bill Veeck, Mike, and she says, Mr. Veeck, if Larry Doby was white, you know that he would be worth $100,000 or more. But if you think $5,000 is fair, I guess I have no choice because I'm not going to be able to continue to fight you guys off. Well, Bill Veeck, as you know, had a heart and a sensitivity for these players in the Negro Leagues anyway. He gives Effa Manley another $5,000 and Larry Doby a $5,000 signing bonus. And that is what set the stage for other Negro League players to start selling their stars to the major leagues. Now, granted, the major leaguers were getting these guys for pennies on the dollar.
Right.
Can you imagine paying $15,000 for a future Hall of Famer? Same thing was done with Willie Mays and Henry Aaron. I mean, so it was pennies on the dollars, but the owners saw the handwriting on the wall. It wasn't a matter of if the Negro Leagues were going to go out of business. It was a matter of when. So now it is a fire sale. It's like, okay, let me get as much out of this as I can before the business of black baseball dies.
Amazing stories, Bob. Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Great stories. And we got to check out the museum, the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City. Bob is the president. Thanks very much, Bob.
And Bob, hang in there
Yeah.
a little bit. We've got a story about Luke Easter coming up, and we'd like you've got a little story on Luke. Murph?
Yeah, no, Big Luke, man. Big Luke.
All right, maybe we'll get back with Bob. There were a couple on the chat line here, a couple people asking about Larry Doby. Terry Connor asked if there's any good books about Larry Doby, and the response already from Howard Henry, the Larry Doby biography, Pride Against Prejudice. So that's important. I'm glad we were able to answer that question. Can I tell you a quick Buck O'Neill story?
Yes.
It's one of my favorite stories. Buck was here. I said it was a dinner, the old Dunlop dinner, right? He was here.
Yep.
We had lunch. We had time to have lunch. And he gave me the greatest, I think it's the best joke I've ever heard. And I told it that
What
night.
is that, Murph?
It's a great joke. He said, why don't you say this? I said, I did. I'll tell the joke. Yeah, so I'm happy to work at Channel 7, blah, blah, blah. But I just signed a contract with ESPN. And the whole crowd goes, oh. And then I said, and for an extra $15, I get Showtime and HBO too. Buck O'Neill told me that joke. It was a great joke. It was a great joke. And I used it that night.
Did you see Jackie Robinson hit that ball? It went zooming across the left field wall. Yeah, boy.
Yes, Jackie hit that ball.
And when he swung his bat, the crowd went wild because he knocked that ball a solid mile. Yeah, boy.
Yes, Jackie hit that ball. Satchel Paige is mellow, so is Campanella. Newcomb and Doby too. But it's a natural fact when Jackie comes to bat, the other team is through.
Did you see Jackie Robinson hit that ball? He hit it